What are the challenges of implementing private sector engagement interventions, and how do we resolve those challenges? That's the topic I'm exploring today. Hello, welcome to today's episode. And in today's episode, I'm exploring 5 challenges that we often encounter when we're implementing private sector engagement interventions and how to resolve them. And the first of those challenges is understanding the motivation and the constraints that the private sector face or private sector actors face. This is actually really, really important because weak understanding will result to weak interventions, which will result to ineffective solutions and programming. So it's best to really engage so we can create and design interventions that are effective. How do we resolve this issue? First of those is to engage with private sector early in identifying the constraints and designing interventions. The earlier we get them involved, the earlier they join us in brainstorming, the earlier they join us in assessing the market, the better our understanding of the constraints that they face is, and the better our understanding of their motivation is. The other thing I think is really important to resolve this challenge is for us to build our own capacity in business operations. What are the things that really concerns the business, and what are the things that motivate them to conduct the business in the way they do? So our own understanding is really important. So we need to build our own capacity in business management, understanding business models, financial planning, and cash flow modeling, how to do scenario planning for different cash flow and different assumptions as far as business operation is concerned. That's especially important so we can understand the motivation and the constraints that they face. The other option that I thought was really important is field exposure. So we can do 1-2 months within a private sector company, so we can begin to so we can see firsthand exactly what it is that they face in terms of challenges and how they resolve those challenges. And that may give us potential ideas on how to support private sector actors in whatever intervention we're designing and to resolve the constraints we're trying to resolve effectively. The second challenge is aligning developmental goals and private sector goals. Private sector actors are generally profit driven. So how do we then align our social impact objective in development with private sector goals? How do we do this? Co-creation. So the first way to resolve that challenge is to really, as I mentioned earlier, to get them involved early and to get them involved in designing, in co-creating, in identifying, in really implementing the intervention. So the earlier we do this, the better. And we can begin to isolate where the overlap is between profit objective and social impact. The other way that I think we can do this is to use blended finance tools. So these models allow us to combine resources from government, resources from development programs, and private sector capital to resolve a particular problem that speaks to the private sector needs and developmental objectives. The third way I think we can really begin to address this challenge is to have an incentive structure that rewards not only achieving commercial goals, but really achieving the social targets that we have for our development objectives. The third challenge that I thought was really important to bring to your attention is the complex regulatory environment in which we work. We often work in agriculture, infrastructure, and enterprises. And all of this are exposed to political risk, currency risk, supply chain challenges. So we need to find a way for us to help the private sector to begin to navigate this a bit more effective. And how do we do this? We need to engage policymakers very early on in our intervention, just like we did with the private sector. We need to get them involved when we're brainstorming on what the issues are, what the challenges are, and the potential solutions is discussed between the private sector, the policymakers, and the and us as development professionals. The other way to think about this is we may offer legal advice as part of the support package that we have for this private sector actors. So, and part of that may be that we bring experts in regulatory environment and regulation and how to help the private sector navigate the private sector, the regulatory environment in which they operate. The other is to create a policy dialogue platform where you have policymakers and you have private sector actors engaging and working through the policy and the implications of the policy and how they can possibly begin to work together to make this a lot easier for private sector actors. The fourth challenge that I thought I should bring to your attention is managing risk and uncertainty. And as I mentioned earlier, we operate in this particularly risky environment, so it's important for the private sector to fully have a real perception of the risk. Very often, they're very risk averse, and their perception of the risk in the environment we work in is a lot higher than the real risk. So we really need to find a way to help them to understand what the real risk is and hopefully create a way for them to engage with us. And how do we manage this risk? And how do we help them manage the risk? The first thing I thought would be really important is to create an effective context-specific risk sharing mechanism. So very often we have plenty of risk mitigation tools that we throw at our problems, but what we don't do much of is to contextualize the tools that we use. I think that's really, really important. The other thing is obviously to use public-private partnership model that will essentially create a risk-sharing mechanism where the risk, whatever the risk is shared between the private sector, the public sector, and the donor agency that does managing this. The other way to manage this is to use staged investment. So we often use pilots, and before we fully commit to scale whatever the intervention is, whatever the engagement is. But in this case, for private sector engagement, what might be good is for us to phase the investment that we do with our private sector partner across three, however many stages that we think will be a lot more effective and useful for our intervention. The last one that I thought is really important is monitoring and measuring impact. As development professionals, we do not often really monitor or at least demonstrate the effectiveness, the impact that private sector engagement interventions have. And the only way we can do that really is to do proper monitoring and measuring. So the first way I thought this is important to tackle this challenge is to develop specific metrics for private sector engagement interventions. So market share, profitability, income growth, and add that to the usual metrics that we have in development, like job creation, employment, enterprise opportunities, and so on. I think that will certainly help towards the challenge if we can create this context-specific matrices that speaks to both the development and the private sector goals. Using digital tools, there's plenty of digital tools now that we can collect real data in real time. As people are engaging with the private sector actors that we're partnering with, or whatever the private sector intervention is, as people are engaging in it, these tools will be collecting real data, and which will expose us to the impact of the intervention, and potentially what we might do to adjust intervention to make it a bit more effective. The last way, the other way I think we might be able to manage this challenge of monitoring and measuring and showing the effectiveness of private sector engagement intervention is to create a sort of like a learning event. So where a regular learning event where we get together as actors, private sector actors, development organizations, and the beneficiaries and government. So we all get together, learn, spell out exactly what has happened throughout the private sector engagement intervention, and learn lessons from it and adjust accordingly. So these are the 5 challenges that I thought I should bring to your attention, and my ideas on how to resolve these challenges. I'm sure you can think about a whole lot more challenges as far as implementing private sector intervention is concerned. Please share with us in the comment section below so we can all learn. Thank you very much for watching, and see you next time.